Welcome to the Breakaway Podcast, a Bible study recorded on the campus of Texas A&M. We hope you enjoy the talks and stick around for more at the end.
Well, we celebrated Martin Luther King Day yesterday, and it was significant because it was 50 years ago that Martin Luther King stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and declared, "I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will be judged not on the basis of the color of their skin, but on the content of their character." And we've come a long way in seeing that happen since the 60s until now, although there's still a long way to go. But one thing that's captured me about that sentence recently is this. He doesn't say, "I long for a day where my children won't be judged at all." No judgment. He says, no, we're going to evaluate each other. I just don't want it to be on surface things like skin color. I want it to be on the content of their character. And my assumption in that as a father is he's hoping that they would have a good character, that people would see that. But he's saying, I hope that when people see my kids, they would evaluate their character. And so it's interesting for me as we launched into this series, as I was preparing the series that we launched last week called What I Want for You. This series was birthed out of my prayers for you. As I prayed about, God, where would you have me go this semester? Where would you have us go? I just felt like he was bringing things to mind for me that I want to be true of you. And at the same time, I'm praying for my daughters. My daughter who's 15 months old and now walking everywhere. And my daughter who is going to be born over spring break. Lord help us, because she's already active in the womb. We're a little scared of her. But I'm praying for them, I'm praying for you, and I find that as I'm praying for y'all, the prayers are enmeshing into one of just a group of things I'm hoping will be true of you. I want to be true of your lives. What qualities do I want to be true of you? And some of these talks over these next couple weeks, I had them sketched out when I started the series. Like I was like, I want this is the text I'm going to use, on and on it goes. With this talk, I just had one word typed on a piece of paper, character. I want my children, my girls, to have character. And I want you to have character. And yet as I dove into that, I realized that's actually not a great word to use. I think that's why even Martin Luther King said, I want them to be judged by the content of their character. Because you can have all kinds of character. You can have a good character, bad character. I can say that guy's a character, which means it's kind of a joker. I looked up in the Oxford Dictionary, it says character is the qualities distinctive to an individual. Oh. That's not real helpful. So I realized that little one word, when I said, I want my girls to have character, and I want you to have character, I realized that's a really insufficient word. And so I did what I've been doing in the series. I'm looking through the Bible, and I start looking for character, and here's where it got crazy for me. The word character, there's not a Greek or Hebrew word in the Bible that translates the word character. There's not a word for character in Hebrew or in Greek. And so there's a couple places in the Bible where our English translations use the word character, but they're not directly translating one of the languages that the Bible was originally written in. They're sort of helping bring across the meaning and the context, so it's not bad to use that word, but it's not an exact word-for-word translation. So I'm like, okay, that's going to complicate things a bit for me. Saying I want you to have character, what am I saying? But so I started looking, okay, what are these words that are being translated character, or bringing character across? And as I looked in the Old Testament, they were all the places where character was used. It's talking about wives, which I thought, okay, I don't want to think about my little girls being wives just yet. That's a little stressful. They're my girls. But I thought, all right, I'm just going to go for it. Let me read them. And they were all passages that say, an excellent wife, what we read earlier, or a wife of noble character is the crown of her husband. Or Proverbs 31, ladies, your favorite passage, says, an excellent wife, or a wife of noble character, who can find? She's more precious than jewels. Many women have done excellently or nobly, but you surpass them all. All of them use that word. The ESV translates excellent. NIV translates of noble character, of character. But they all translate a word in Hebrew. It's the word chayil, which means strength. Strength. I thought, well, that's kind of cool because I want my girls to have strength, and I kind of want you to have strength too. I like that. And so I'm looking at that word strength, and it's all through the Old Testament. It's used to talk about strength of like your body, like the strength of a man's legs or the strength of a horse. It's often used of men in the military, that men of strength, men who have the power and ability to fight well. It became used as a noun. It meant army. And so far and away in the Old Testament, it's used to, that word chayil is translated in the English, army, like Pharaoh's army. Pharaoh's strength attacked Israel, which is kind of weird that that's the noun is the same word that's used to describe the Proverbs 31 woman as an excellent woman or praiseworthy woman. The noun is army. So it's weird. It's like if we use that as the adjective, you would just say, can I find an army woman? She's more precious than jewels. You know what I mean? Or guys could be like, that girl is so army. And I mean, that's kind of what it's saying. But what they are talking about is strength or power. But then it just began to be used in places of talking about ability, like people who had the power to lead well, or the power to make good decisions. Or in these texts, it's women who have the power to do the right thing. And so it's talking about they have capacity, ability, a nobility about them. And so it's this word power or strength. And I'm like, okay, I like that. I would pray that for my girls. I want them to be strong. I don't want them to be timid, wilting little, I'm a victim. I don't want that. And I want you to be strong too. I want that for you. But then I realized that's really not enough, because strength can be used for evil, and it's happens all through the Old Testament. That same word is used for strength. In Isaiah, he talks about people who are heroes of mixing drinks, strong in mixing wine. And then he says they are facing the very condemnation of God. So if you're like, yeah, I'm strong at mixing, oh no, yeah, that's not good, in Isaiah 5. So I realized strength isn't enough, because strength can be used for evil. But if you look at the context that these women are called strength, and we translate it excellent or noble, the reason is because in those contexts, what makes those women so worthy is they use their strength for good. I don't know if you've read Proverbs 21, but that woman is busy. She's sewing clothes for her family, cooking meals. She's got into real estate. She's doing agriculture. She's making moves, buying things, selling things. That woman is busy. But if you look through Proverbs 31, it's always for someone else. That I'm clothing my family. I'm feeding my family. And then it says she has an open hand to the poor, and she's generous with those in need. What's so wonderful about these women in Proverbs 12 and 31 is they have power, they have strength, and they use that power and strength not for themselves to exploit others for their gain, but they use it for good. For those near them in their sphere of influence, their family, and even beyond them, those in need. Strength used for the good of others. And I thought, that's what I want. That's what I want for my girls, and that's what I want for you, because you have strength. You have capacity. You have ability. That's why you're here at this school. You're very motivated, powerful, influential people, and you will be, and I want you to use that power for good. And I want that for my girls. I don't want them to be strong and use that strength to be bullies. I want them to use it to stick up for people. And you've got physical power. Some of you are very strong physically, and you can use all that for selfish gains, just to sculpt your body, you know. And I don't care if you work out. I don't think you need to post pictures of it on Twitter or something. But I don't care if you do that. But some of you, all that physical strength is just harnessed towards advancing your looks. What if you channeled some of that power into building a home for somebody in need? And what if you did that with your life? Some of you, it's not about the physical power, but you've got mental capacities. And are you going to use all your gifts and abilities to just earn up a bunch of money for you and build your little kingdom and your house with all your cool gadgets and technology? Or what if you use some of your abilities to solve some problems in the world or help some people? Or man, some of you have social power. That's where your power lies. And you can use that social power to ostracize people with less, to mock them and marginalize them. Or you can use it for good. I met a young man last week, came forward. He's from Iraq. Hasn't been in the country all that long, but got here alone and was in a park, and some guys that had social power, they had friendships, they had a group, they had a party. They saw a guy alone and they welcomed him in. They used their power for good, and I thought, that's what I want. I want people who will use their strength for good. That's noble. That's worthy. That's the kind of character I'm talking about. I was on a plane a couple weeks ago and I bought a book about Lincoln and I was reading it and enjoying it. But on the way home from Nashville, I was exhausted, and it's hard to read about Lincoln when you're tired. And I saw that there was another book on the New York Times bestseller list about Superman. So I bought that. And I thought, that one's easier to read right now. And it was the new Superman. They made him young 20s. They're kind of rebooting him. He wears a hoodie, whatever. And it's like he's coming out. And at one point, he's just kind of conflicted about his identity as a 20-year-old. And his mom tells him, honey, I don't care if you just play the banjo as long as you're happy. And I remember reading that and thinking, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. For him to have all that power and just play the banjo, I'm mad. I'm mad at the author. That is the stupidest thing ever. And his maker would be mad at him. That's a waste of life. And I'm not knocking on the banjo. You play the banjo, do it. But if that's all you do to make yourself happy, you missed it. And if you use all your power to just play little games to make yourself happy, that's a waste of power. And I don't want my girls to do that. And I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to do that. There's too much ability to not use it nobly. I want them to have strength they harness for good. So here's the cool thing about that. I'm like, the word strength is not enough. And so what I realized in that passage we read, that when it's talking about that strong woman, the noble woman, she's flanked by two passages that talk about the righteous person who will never be moved, or the thoughts of the righteous are just. And I realized these are all synonyms, that this worthy woman is a righteous woman. So I started coming around this word righteousness, or to be right, or to do what's righteous. And some scholars say, well, that word means to conform to a standard. And I thought, well, that's not real motivational. Kids, I want you to conform to a standard, I thought, you can do that. You can be people who say, I'm going to take all my power and I'm going to use it to conform to a little standard. But the truth is, we've all known self-righteous people. And they're intolerable. I don't like being around them. I don't know if you do. People that it's just all about, can I make sure that I'm okay? And I don't care about y'all. I don't talk like that. I don't smoke that. I don't drink that. Get away from me. You're dirty. All right? Like, people that are just about themselves and making themselves pristine and pure, they annoy the world. And a lot of the frustration in a non-believing world is Christians that they perceive are just all about just making sure that I'm pure and I don't care what happens to you. And so I don't want self-righteous girls. And yet here's the good news. Using this strength and power to do what's right, the word righteousness in the Bible, righteousness never means just making sure you're pristine and pure and you're living up to some rule. Because it does mean to conform to a standard, but then the question has to be asked, what standard? And what you realize is the standard is God. Psalm 11 says, the Lord is righteous. He loves righteous deeds. Psalm 119 says, righteous are you, O Lord, and right are your rules. The truth is, the standard is God. And here's the thing about righteousness. We often define it as a judicial word. It's like a courtroom scene. If you're right, then you are right with the court of law, you are righteous. Or if you're wrong, you've broken the law, you're against it. So it's conforming to a standard. You've either conformed to it perfectly or you've not. And we've used all courtroom imagery. And it does have a courtroom element. But here's the idea of righteousness. It's a deeply personal word. Because it's not just that I've conformed to a standard. It's behind that standard is a person who made that standard for reasons. And those reasons are good. And so when I act unrighteously, it's not that I'm breaking some law on some sheet of paper. I'm violating God because righteousness flows from Him. You could illustrate it this way. If I cheated on my wife, the great tragedy in that moment would not be, I broke the marriage law. I signed a little sheet of paper that said I would be faithful to her, and I violated the contract, broke the contract, whoops, violated this piece of paper. That's not the issue. The great horror, if I was unfaithful to my wife, is not that I violated our marriage contract, though I did. It's that I hurt her, a person. It's not about this piece of paper. It's about the person behind it. And righteousness in the Bible is not, oh, I'm supposed to follow some list of rules. I get it. It's not about a list. It's about a person, a God who loves what is right. And the woman of power and the man of power, the one the Bible celebrates, is people who have their power and they use it to do what's right. Right being that they walk closely with God and care about what he cares about. The first place you see the word righteous, it says Noah was righteous. He walked with God. That's what it means to be righteous. Is that I will conform to a standard because I know the person behind it and I care about him. Or Johnny Cash said it this way, because you're mine, I walk the line. And that's what I mean. We act righteously. Why? Because we love the righteous one. That's what the Bible says to do. And here's the interesting thing. When you do that, the righteousness God calls us to is not, okay, don't do this, don't do that, do this. If you start studying righteousness in the Bible, you see in Proverbs 12, it talks about this noble, excellent woman who's a crown to her husband. And then it says, the thoughts of the righteous are just. When you say, I want to be right with God, I want to do what pleases God, I start thinking about what is just. That means what is right in the eyes of other people, what is the most beneficial to society. And what's fascinating about that is as you start studying righteousness in the Bible, the righteousness that pleases God always is doing what's good and best for other people. It's not just following a list. It's, I want to please you, God. And he says, okay, what's right is that you do what's good, what's best, what's most beneficial, what's just for others. So Proverbs 12:26 says the one who is righteous guides his neighbor. It's the wicked who leads them astray. Proverbs 37 says the wicked borrows money and doesn't pay it back. That's evil. But it says the righteous one is generous and he gives. In Leviticus, when God was laying down the laws, you're like, oh, the laws of the Old Testament, they're so oppressive. He says, here's my laws. Stand up before the gray head and honor old men. When a stranger sojourns in your land, don't do him wrong. Treat him like a native and love him as you love yourself. And don't use wrong judgments and measures of length or weight or quality. Don't cheat each other. Those are the laws of God. God says, you want to know my heartbeat? I want you to walk with me. And as you do, I want you to be generous to people. When you see someone who's a stranger and alone, I want you to be kind to them. I don't want you to cheat people, and I don't want you to lie people to get money from them. Don't use people, serve people. And so you realize in the Bible, you go, okay, what is it to have character? It's too small a word. I want my girls to have the power to walk with God towards doing good for others. That's what I want. That's character. That's character. I want them to have the strength to do what's right. That's what I want from them. Because let me tell you something. When you come to know God and walk with him, he will lead you to do what's righteous, and that is always expressed in what is best for other people. So William Wilberforce was a young guy in England in the 19th century, party boy. Loved staying up late, loved partying. He had a lot of money. He was elite, had a lot of money to blow and have good times. That was William Wilberforce. He ran for Parliament at the age of 21 as a joke. And he won. And was in Parliament the next 40 years. But he's still 21 and loved to party, baby. And so he'd go and just lived a crazy life, whatever. And then over the breaks, he would take long holidays. He'd go on trips. And so he went to the French Riviera, and he brought a buddy along with him, Isaac Miller. And as he brought Isaac with him, he found out when they were traveling the French Riviera that Isaac was an evangelical Christian. Buzzkill. But he starts hanging out with Isaac and realizes, actually, this guy's pretty cool. And actually, this guy seems to have a better sense of what's going on in the world than I do. And so on their trip together, they just started discussing the Bible, started reading the Bible, started studying the Bible. And by the end of that year, curiosity for Wilberforce became belief. And he said, I want to know the Jesus you know. And by the end of the year, that belief had become a conviction. I want to walk with this God. And it didn't take very long before he wrote down in his diary, God Almighty has set before me two great objects, the suppression of the slave trade and the reformation of morals. He says, I want to walk with God. I want to be right with God. And it did not take very long before God lifted his eyes and said, you want to be right with me? Look out at the world, man. There's people who are being oppressed. Change it. Change it. And Wilberforce spent the rest of his life, 20 years, leveraging his power to try to end the slave trade. And you know what? He did it. He did it without a shot fired. We had all kinds of civil wars and KKK and Jim Crow and all this craziness in America. They didn't over there because a Christian said, I want to walk with God, and God points him towards others who are hurting. And let me tell you something, 19th century England rung out with names like that. Lord Ashley, the Earl of Shaftesbury. Lord Ashley came to Christ and looked around and saw little children were put to work back in England in the 19th century, 16-hour days of work, 6 days a week. And the littlest kids, what do you do with them? Well, the truth is when you burn logs in fireplaces, a lot of soot gets caught up in the chimney. It's a fire hazard. And so not many big men can fit in chimneys, but little kids can. So let's just lower them into chimneys. And so little chimney, that's little children sweeping out chimneys, getting black lung and cancer. And Lord Ashley came to Christ and said, you know what? I don't think it's right to exploit children. And I'm not going to sit back and go, well, that's the world we live in. And so many of us, we just kind of lull into what's acceptable in the culture. But when you decide to walk with God, your heart gets right with God. And you start to see if there's brokenness, I'm going to change it. And I'm going to enact truth. I'm not just going to make sure, well, I don't get drunk. I'm going to go, okay, I'm not going to get drunk. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go and spend that money on helping the poor. I'm going to spend that money on making a difference in the world. I am going to launch out because righteousness becomes doing what's just and right and good for others. And that's the kind of kid I want. One that has the strength to do what's best for others because they walk with God. Right? Now, what's going to give them the strength to do that? What's going to give you the strength to do that? Why would you do what's righteous? What do you care? Why would you not sleep with your girlfriend? Everybody else is doing it. It'd be fun. Why be righteous? Well, Habakkuk said that the righteous will live by faith. In the passage we read earlier in Proverbs 12, it says, the house of the righteous will stand. The roots of the righteous will never be moved. See, the reason I'm righteous, the reason I do right things is because I trust God. That he says, when I walk with you, you created this world. You have a way it's meant to work. And so when I walk with you, that means I'm going to do things for others at my expense all the time. But I'm going to trust you in it because you tell me the roots of the righteous won't be moved. The wicked, they're going to blow away like chaff. Their world can't be sustained. But you're going to bless me. You're going to care for me. The righteous live by faith. They say, God, I'm going to do what you say because I believe you. I trust you. And if you don't have that relational confidence in God, you won't do what's righteous. Righteousness is rooted in that relationship. And if you don't trust him, then doing what's right will get old. But if you love him, you'll do it because you'll believe him that it's best. So why not sleep with your girlfriend? Why not sleep with your boyfriend? What if they want to? Well, because you can sit there and say, even if they want me to do it, I look and I go, but God told me not to. And the truth is, I don't want to put myself, if I'm not their husband, not their wife, then I don't want to be in their mind on their wedding day. I don't want to insert my name and my story into their wedding night. I have no business being there. God's ordained for sexuality to be special and be a gift. And I'm not going to take that without promising to care and protect and love for sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, until the day she dies. I can't offer her that level of security, so I'm not going to take her sexuality. I don't care if she tells me she's up for it. And what's going to give you the power to do that? You're going to turn down sexuality and go, man, that feels crazy. And the culture is going to tell you it's crazy. But you do it because your God tells you it's right. And let me tell you something, when you get to your wedding day, and so many of us, hey, maybe all of us at this point, are going to have to come to the person we marry and say, hey, I've been a part of some sad things, and we'll confess to each other, and we'll weep, and we'll forgive each other, and we'll walk in freedom together. So there's hope if you've failed sexually. There is hope. You don't leave here in despair. But the truth is, if you can walk in and say, hey, man, I protected this moment because God called us to, there's something sweet about that. Even if it said, hey, I was late to the game, but from this point on, I protected it. There's something sweet to that. God will bless that. God will bless that. You want that. Do you believe he'll provide for you? Will you break up with that person because you know they're not pursuing the Lord? And you go, well, what if I never date somebody? And that's scary. But if you trust God, you'll break up with the wrong person because you go, I don't see the right person out there, but I see God and I trust him. And he'll lead you. It was interesting. We had someone, there was a time at Breakaway where money was really tight. I mean, like more bills than money coming in at Breakaway. Back when I first got here. And I remember we were at that point where we didn't have big sugar daddies writing big checks and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't know if we were going to make it. But I remember there was one time where this check came in, and I won't tell you how much it was for, but it was the most I had seen written on a check before, you know, just kind of watching the zeros stack up. And I was like, where did this come from? And it was from some organization with a name, that I'm like, I don't know how to track them down. Someone gave through a charity. I don't know how to track them down. It wasn't until years later I was working at a different ministry, helping out there, and they're like, oh, I know that guy. Do you want to meet him? Yeah, I want to meet him. So they set up a lunch for me with this person who, in many ways, helped keep us alive and didn't know me personally. And I sat down with him when we were visiting, and I said, so how did we get connected? How did that happen? And he said, oh, well, you know, I got kids. And I ask them every year, who do you want to give to? Because I got money to give away. He said, and one of my sons said, I want to give to Breakaway. And he didn't know what that was. He's like, I don't know what you did. And I asked him why. And he said it was in a season where his son was awkward, alone, and the people here were nice to him. And they were kind to him. And he said, so I want to give to them. And his dad said, okay. And we're still here. Because someone decided, I'm just going to do what's right. I'm going to be generous to the poor and to the needy. I'm going to reach out with the social power I've been given. And we're here because someone decided to do what's righteous. That's what it means to trust God. I'm going to trust you, God, and I'm going to trust your ways best. And I believe that it'll work out. That when I walk with you, the roots go deep and the tree flourishes. But if we all become selfish, this thing won't last. And yet here's the sad reality tonight. It's this. We're meant to be righteous. I want that for you. I want that for my kids. To be right with God and blessing each other. To have the strength to walk with God, to bless others, because I trust him. But the tragedy in the Bible is none of us are righteous. If you say, Ben, I want to be that kind of person. I want to be somebody who steps out of here and I have the strength to do what's best for the people around me, the absolute best thing. I always say the right word to build them up. I always give the money to help them flourish. I always restrain from that which they don't need, give that which they do. I'm always a blessing to those around me. I want to be that kind of person. If you say that, the truth is all of us, if we're honest, we realize you're not that person. And neither am I. And that's the Bible's assessment too. The book of Romans says that when God searches the earth, he says there's no one righteous, not even one. There's no one who seeks God. All have turned aside. Together we've become worthless. Ecclesiastes 7 says there's not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. Psalm 143 says no one living is righteous among you. So here's the problem. I want my kids to be righteous. I want you to be righteous. But by your own strength, your own power, you can't. So what do? It's interesting. There's only one other passage in the Bible that mixes these ideas of strength and righteousness and being rooted and flourishing like a tree. And it was in Isaiah 61. And Isaiah 61 was the exact passage that Jesus read, his first sermon. He's anointed in the water, he's baptized, and God speaks over him, "This is my son." The Spirit of God lands on him. He's tempted in the desert. He's victorious over sin. And he comes into the city. They give him a scroll. He opens it up to this passage. And he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant to those who mourn in Zion, to give them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a faint spirit, that they may be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. They shall build up the ancient ruins. They shall raise up the former devastations. They shall repair the ruined cities, the devastation of many generations. You will be called priests of the Lord, ministers of our God, and you'll eat from the strength of the nations." We want to be righteous and we're not. You say, "Ben, I've said things that are unrighteous. They weren't good for people. They didn't honor God. I've done things sexually that weren't good for other people and weren't right before God. I've said things, done things, thought things, lived places." And some of you go, "Ben, I'm so dirty. I'm so unrighteous." Well, the biblical assessment is, welcome. That's all of us. There's no one righteous. No, not one. And yet into this broken, dirty world, Jesus came in and said, "But the Spirit of the Lord's on me to come to the poor and the oppressed and the captive and the broken, and to proclaim to you, you can be free. And I can break your cords of bondage. And I can put beauty where there was ashes. And then I'm going to take the poor, broken, captive, sinful people of the world, and I'm going to make them an oak of righteousness, a planting of the Lord." That's our story. That Jesus came and he is the righteous one. And he said, "I am going to plant you and make you righteous." How did he do it? We sang about it. That he who knew no sin became sin for us, that we might be the righteousness of God in him. So you're unclean and so am I. But when we put our faith, our trust in Jesus, he makes us righteous. And not just righteous. He says, "I'm going to make you an oak of righteousness. I'll make you strong." And so you can be strong to do what's best for others because I trust him. And that's what I want for you. That's what I want for my girls. I want you to have character, that you're strong to be a blessing for others because you trust the righteous one and what he'll do in you and through you when you trust him.
Welcome to the Breakaway Podcast. I'm sitting with Ben Stewart. My name is Jeremy, and it is great to have you guys joining us today. And Ben, we just completed our second night of the new semester.
That's right.
At Breakaway, we were in Reed Arena and packed it out again, which was really cool.
Yeah, it was a fun night, man.
Had a bunch of students excited to be with us, and the weather in this town in College Station, Texas has been beautiful and incredible. And so it was fun getting to come into Reed last night with people in high spirits and ready to worship. And speaking of worship, we had our good friend, our good old buddy, Aaron Ivey, come back and join us last night for worship. And that was just wonderful to have him back.
Well, they're so gifted. And I think, and I mean that in the fullest sense, like God has gifted them with the ability to guide people in worship. And I love that. And I love watching the shepherding they do of a room. And so it was wonderful to have them back. And they won't be here as much as in the past. We kind of made that announcement last night. But that's for the best of reasons. It's because they're getting more involved in their local church in terms of discipling men and training up worship leaders and doing some great things that we celebrate, and which makes it harder for them as their families grow to keep traveling around. So we'll miss them here, but it's a great reason. The good news is they're churning out CDs like somebody's paying them to. I don't know.
Yeah, left and right.
CDs coming out everywhere.
Yeah, it's like popcorn just popping up everywhere.
It's wonderful. But they're great. And I love the one that just came out, Reveille, named after
A&M's mascot?
Yes.
Okay.
The dog. And it's an instrumental, and I love it. I've been studying to it, and it's worshipful.
It is very, very worshipful.
Awesome.
So yeah, it was awesome having those guys back with us, and we'll actually be with them this weekend because we're doing our lead conference, and we mentioned that last week on the podcast, and we're just really excited about what's coming up this weekend, and that they'll be leading, as well as some of our friends who will be speaking and people you're putting in front of the students to really speak into their world.
Man, we've got people who planted successful churches, people who've worked at the Pentagon, people who have started multi-million-dollar corporations, people who have faithfully served in ministry for years. We've got all kinds of different people coming to speak to these students. And I just can't wait, man. I just can't wait. Seeing students sign up that I know are leading others and saying, we're going to sit around and say, how do we take the gift of leadership God's given you and say, how do I lead diligently? And how do I lead responsibly? And with wisdom and with love. And so I just can't wait to jump into it, man. And it's going to be a powerful weekend.
And so by the time people are listening to this podcast, we'll still have about 48 hours before we do the conference. And would love for you guys, if you're interested in joining us here, it will be at First Baptist Bryan. And you can go to our breakawayministries.org website and sign up through that. Register. It's only $20, and you can come show up at the door as well. But we'd love for you to go ahead and complete the registrations before this weekend, and it helps us to plan and all that good stuff. But would really encourage any students who are here at A&M to show up. And then if you're listening to this and you're living close enough to drive down, we would love for you to come join us at the LEAD conference.
Please do.
So we're excited about it, and really excited about the semester, just where we're headed. And you've been doing a series, Ben, titled What I Want for You. And last night was a great talk on character. And so we love being able to do this part because you get a chance to just share a little bit more than time allows during our time at Reed. So I'll turn it over to you, let you share maybe some thoughts you have about last night.
Yeah, I don't think I'll there's always a temptation to re-preach it, and I won't do that. But I did one as I gave the sermon to kind of walk people through the journey I went on of realizing the word character is not a bad word. It's just really not sufficient. It's not a deep enough word for what I feel I want for my little girls and then for these students as I prayed for them. And that's what I love about doing this sermon. Not that I don't mean talks. I think it's important to be sincere. You study the Word of God till it lights your heart ablaze, and then you preach it. But there's something cool about doing a series where we go, this is just in the most unfiltered way, maybe just coming and saying, this is what I think about for you and want for you. And so I wanted to take them on a journey of realizing the words I had started with really weren't sufficient and going, but journeying into the Bible, what I'm seeing is being a person of character, someone who does what's noble or honorable or beautiful with their life. You go, what does that look like? And at the end of the day, what it lands on is it's the person who walks with God, because God is noble and beautiful and always does what is best for people. And as you walk with him, he'll lead you into that kind of life. And so it doesn't become, like if I said be righteous, what I think most people think of is, okay, don't do bad things. And that's true, but the point is it's meant to liberate you to do what is good and beautiful and ultimately more satisfying and joyful, So back to the marriage analogy, I don't cheat on my wife. And it's not like, well, there's this list of rules. And in order to be righteous, I got to not sleep around. You're like, no, I don't do that because there's a superior joy in getting to press in to know her and have a life where we share everything, and then we build a family together, and that is the better thing. It's just the better thing, and not just better like that was the right thing to do. It's right, and you find when you do what's right, it's more deeply satisfying. So you can throw your life away on drugs, and there is joy that comes in it, but the cost is so high relationally. You go, that's a waste of life, so don't do that. Why? So it'll liberate you to enjoy friendships and the sunrise and some beautiful things you lose sight of when you're caught and chained to this. And that's true of any life. You can live a selfish life. And you go, well, I'm not a bad person, but if you look at the aggregate of how you spend your time, your energy, your money, it's basically just about you. But you see the people who walk with God, they become people who it's not that anymore. And that's what I was getting to with Wilberforce, of just him going, okay, I can't just be me kicking it and spending money on whatever I want the rest of my life. Not if I know God. I move towards doing what's right. And as he did that, he found that infinitely more satisfying in his life, rather than just playing games out on a beach. And I'm not saying he never did that again, but a life that consisted of that. He changed history for a nation, for nations. It's unbelievable, you know. And that's what I'm calling us to live a bigger life like that. But then, again, we closed it out with, but you can't do that. We all look and go, well, I just don't know that my soul's that large to live that big a life. Well, it isn't. We're all dirty. We're all broken, and irreparably so by our own efforts. But that's the beauty of the gospel, is we have a God who came to not just forgive us of the bad stuff we did, but to get all of that out of the way. Say, hey, I want you to know you're forgiven. You're clean. You're loved. You're made pure. And I'm liberating you to not just be with me, but to be with me and join me. That you are officially righteous and you're standing before me. And now you get to live righteously by walking with me and loving others. That's the beauty of the gospel, the liberty from the chains to do what's right. And the joy of finding out what's right is infinitely more satisfying. It really is. And I've seen that play out in so many friends' lives. When they do what's righteous, they find, you know what? It's so much more satisfying to be guilt-free, to be knowing that my energy is spent towards something noble and beautiful. We want that kind of life. It's a soul-enlarging kind of life. And that's what I want for these students. I really do. So I felt like, it's so hard to get words around that. Last night felt difficult for me, but that's what I want and where we were headed. So, and that's what I want for you, too, everybody listening.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was sitting there last night, and it hit me that, you know, the right thing and the right path and the right decisions never are easy.
No.
Never. And so for me, it was like, and when Christ was walking the earth and living among us, his path wasn't easy. It wasn't, you know, this really smooth journey, you know.
Yeah.
And so for those of you out there who are struggling, and you're having to fight each day to do the right thing and to be righteous as God calls us to holiness and righteousness.
Yeah.
Be encouraged, because you are, the reward is great and Jesus is better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where righteousness is by faith. Do I believe you? And will I do it the way you say to do it, even when I think this will hurt me? This could ruin my life. This would be less fun. But then you look and go, wow, I'm so glad I did that. I'm so glad I lived that way. Because the benefits are greater. And yeah, Christ made enemies, had no home, had a severe loss of comfort. But you look at what his life purchased, an eternal celebration with the people who he rescued, us. You go, dude, that was totally worth it. Totally worth it. And you look at our friends who are leveraging their lives for, hey, I'm going to go and serve the poor. That's really hard. You can romanticize that, but that's tough. But when you look back over your life and see, I helped change the the trajectory of families for generations, dude, totally worth it. Totally worth it. And I want us to live lives like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, man, thanks so much. And everybody listening, we appreciate you guys tuning into this podcast. And we're excited about next week. We'll be in Rudder Auditorium, which for us is different. We have to do 2 different hours because it's a smaller venue and it's on campus. And for us, it's hard to put everybody into one hour. And so we're doing a 7 o'clock and a 9 o'clock. Typically, the 7 is not as well attended, although last spring when we did Rudder, we had people show up and it was awesome.
We've made some pretty strong pleas, requests, threats.
Maybe begging.
Yeah, a little bit of that splashed in. And so for those of you who've always wanted to come and you go, man, 9 o'clock so late, come to the 7. It's obviously a little different feel because not everybody all together, but it's still us and it's still on campus and still awesome. And I can't wait for next Tuesday, man. So.
Yeah, it is a great venue. The auditorium is beautiful. Sound is great. And it's just such a fun kind of more communal, smaller atmosphere, even though it fits like 2,500 people. So it's a good size little
Intimately.
venue.
It's an intimate
So come join us 7 and 9 o'clock at Rudder. We look forward to seeing you guys there. And thanks again for listening.
Bye.